The Netherlands, ranked 8th in the world by FIFA, the men in orange have now qualified for an 11th tournament in Qatar, and though the nation may be a small place, they certainly pack a punch in the world's game on the world stage. The Dutch qualified for their first tournament way back in 1934, but due to the format, they would only play one game. Switzerland would defeat them at the San Siro 3-2. And then 4 years later, in 1938, they would only grace the French edition with 90 minutes as well. They would hold off the men from Czechoslovakia 0-0 to overtime, where they promptly gave up 3 goals. They would not qualify for the tournament again until one Johan Cruyff was wearing the bright orange kit. An enigma to be sure, but one of the most influential men in not just Dutch history, but the history of this great sport as well. The mind of this genius supposed people didn't have to stay in one area of the pitch, didn't have to maintain their position for the entire game. With force of will and an arrogance that all the greats have, total football was brought to life. The men from Uruguay would be the first Dutch test, and they swept them aside 2-0. A tepid 0-0 followed versus Sweden, but this particular game isn't famous for goals. The iconic turn we all learned as children would stun the Swedish defender and the world. Although it didn't result in a goal, it was a moment that reverberated through history and would never be forgotten. They should have given the Dutch a goal just for the move. The men in orange would then face the Bulgarians in the third game and destroy them in a 4-1 rout. The '74 Cup was still employing the double group stage format, and the Netherlands could not have advanced to a worse second group. First up was Argentina, and Cruyff scored twice. Dutch never lost a match in which Cruyff scored in 49 games. He would score in 22 of them, and they never lost. Flying high, the East Germans couldn't stop the momentum, and Cruyff and the gang went to the proverbial semi-final with Brazil. The Starman netted in the 65th, and they advanced to the final 2-0. It would be in this match that the runners-up curse would settle on Dutch shoulders. Although losing to West Germany in their capital to a Gert Miller goal is not exactly cause for shame, especially when this tournament would forever be remembered as the cup that brought the world total football. Qualification for Argentina 1978 was smooth. Some of the stars of the previous tournament were still around, and the Dutch had no problems. However, just before the tournament was to begin, Cruyff was the victim of a kidnapping attempt that would cause him to decide to forego traveling to South America. His family had a police escort for a while, and Barcelona supplied him a personal bodyguard just to go to training. Without their talisman, how would the Dutch get on? The 3-0 win over Iran was a brilliant start, but then a drab 0-0 with Peru showed warning signs, which were highlighted in the 3-2 loss to Scotland. This was enough, however, to see them into the second group stage, where their opponents increased in quality considerably. No matter, the men from the Netherlands rolled over the Austrians 5-1 to set up a rematch of the last final. Müller would score against them again, but it would end 2-2. This set up the semi-final against the Italians. A 76th minute winner would see them through to once again play the host nation in the final. Despite some pre-match nonsense, the game would ensue. Something about overtime seems to haunt the men of total football, and this one was tied after 90 minutes, 1-1. The team from Buenos Aires would not be denied, scoring twice in overtime to lift the cup on home soil, and then wait for the idea of the Dutch as the best runners-up in World Cup history. Cruyff's generation had passed, and a new crop of stars were wearing the orange. It would take 12 years, but they were back in Italy in 1990. An interesting group saw them draw with Egypt, then England, then Ireland. The third-place teams were in with a chance in this tournament, and the Dutch qualified as one of the better third-place finishers. This meant, however, they would, for the third cup running, face the West Germans. And despite a late Ronald Koeman pin, the Dutch would fall at this stage, as they did back in the 30s, in a match that they'd rather forget. Enter Dennis Bergkamp. The man so beloved by Arsenal fans would be hugely important to the Dutch efforts in the United States edition. A strong start with a 2-1 win over Saudi Arabia was followed by a tough loss to the Belgians. A wide open group would mean that the 2-1 win over Morocco on the back of Bergkamp's first World Cup goal was enough to see them through. Bergkamp would net yet again versus the Irish in the round of 16, seeing them through to the quarterfinal versus the indomitable Brazilians. Despite an equalizer in the 76th minute, Brazil, as they often do, would prove too much for the men from the Netherlands, sending them home with a heart-crushing winner in the 81st. The World Cup loves to give chances to get back at rivals in the following tournament, and the Netherlands would open France 98 with a draw versus Belgium. A resounding 5-0 over South Korea followed to set up a contest for top spot versus Mexico. The 2-2 would be enough to see the Dutch win the group on goal difference. They would then dump the Yugoslavia out of the tournament for the final time that they would be known as such. Through to the quarterfinal, it would see a chance at revenge for the 78 final, playing against Argentina. I could listen to the Dutch commentator on Bergkamp's 89th minute stunner over and over again. Frank de Boer launches one from his own half, and an on-rushing Bergkamp brings it down with the silkiest of smooth touches around the defender. One bounce and a volley into the opposite corner signaled a rapturous euphoria in Holland, avenging the 78 final and sending the Orange into the semis for another shot at revenge. Patrick Kluivert would score late again to cancel out Ronaldo's 46th minute strike, and they would face Brazil in penalties. Heartbreak, the only way a penalty shootout knows how, would see them into the third-place game, where mystifying debutants would beat them to the podium. Davor Suker got the winning goal, and the Netherlands finished fourth. Another generation had arrived by the time Holland were in the World Cup again. The likes of Arjen Robben, Ruud van Nistelrooy, and Robin van Persie would wear the orange in Germany for the 06 Cup. All three would have goals in the first two matches, where they defeated Serbia and Montenegro 1-0, and the Ivory Coast 2-1. A 0-0 versus perennial rivals Argentina saw them through to face the Portuguese in the round of 16. This match lives in infamy as the Battle of Nuremberg. A whopping 20 cards, 4 of which were red, 3 of those shown to the Portuguese. This was more of a gladiator battle royale than a football match. Miniche did bag a goal near halftime, but from the second-minute yellow to Van Bommel, all the way to the 95th minute red for Gio van Bronckhorst, this one was as dirty as they come. Astonishingly, the Dutch couldn't manage to score even with the numerical advantage, and went crashing out in purely disgusting fashion. Add Dirk Kuyt, Wes Sneijder, and Klaas-Jan Huntelaar to the mix for South Africa, and another dramatic run in the Cup. They would defeat Denmark, then Japan, and then Cameroon for a perfect group stage. Slovakia gave them a game in the round of 16, but Holland proved too much, and found themselves with another shot at revenge on the Brazilians. A Wes Sneijder double was enough to finally get one over on their old-time rivals, to send them into one of the most entertaining semifinals of all time. Gio van Bronckhorst scores one of the greatest goals in World Cup history, and I could watch it over and over again. Of course, Diego Forlan equalized, as he does, but Wes Sneijder put them back in front, before a famous header from Arjen Robben would eventually prove the winner, as the 92nd minute Pereira goal was not enough to best the men in orange. On to another final. The Spanish juggernaut awaited. A hotly contested final, this one, very physical with a disjointed first half. The second half is most memorable for an Arjen Robben breakaway that he will obviously never forget, ever. The outstretched toenail of Iker Casillas was enough to see Robben's attempt trickle wide, and the 90 ended 0-0. Heitinga would be sent off, and Andres Iniesta would compound the curse and leave the Dutch with naught but silver once again. A scintillating prospect in the opening match of Brazil 2014 for the Dutch against Spain would see yet again a chance at revenge, and they took it with flying aplomb. There have been many magical maestros of technical brilliance for the Dutch over the years, but if you want a highlight reel, Robin van Persie is a scorer of magnificent, sensational goals. No one expected a 5-1 Dutch victory to open the tournament, but the Flying Dutchman produced one of my favorite goals I've ever seen on the grandest stage. Australia was up next in a thriller that produced another immaculate goal. However, it was Timmy Cahill with a thunderous volley that wasn't enough as Holland won the match 3-2. The subsequent 2-0 win over Chile was decidedly less dramatic than the first two games, but it was a perfect group stage for the Dutch. It would take more drama as the men in orange scored two late stunners to beat Mexico in the round of 16. Then they went to penalties to see them pass the Costa Rican upstarts who surprised everyone in 2014, and they were in to another semifinal. 0-0 to penalties once again versus an old rival in Leo Messi and Argentina, where the dream fell just short. Despite a 3-0 win over a shocked Brazil side in the third-place match, the curse lives on, and the title of Best to Never Win a Cup is simply unsatisfying. Drawn into the hosts group for Qatar, it will be up to Memphis Depay and another wave of Dutch flyers to try to break the curse. Up against Sadio Mane in Senegal, the Ecuadorians, and then the hosts. The men in orange will be relishing the opportunity for another deep run. Can they manifest the spirit of maestros like Cruyff and Bergkamp and finally do what none before have done and lift the World Cup for the very first time?